All right, so before we begin, I would just like to state for the record that today is March 30th, 2022, and my name is Ben Bauman. I'm here in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I'm speaking via phone with Dave Cheatham, who is in North Vernon, Indiana, and we are doing an interview for the Indiana Legislative Oral History Initiative. So just starting off, when and where were you born?
I was born in Madison, Indiana in 1951.
Okay, and what were your parents' names?
My dad's name was Gene, Gene, and my mother's name was Vera, Vera.
Okay, and when did your family move to Indiana?
Our family has been in Indiana for a long time. We actually traced history back to Sarah Mosley, who was a great-great-great-great-grandmother that lived in Madison back in the 1800s.
Wow.
So we've been around Madison for a long time.
Yeah, okay. And what were your parents' occupations?
My dad worked for the Jefferson Proving Ground, which is a military testing facility for ammunition. And my mother worked in a factory in Madison making musical instruments called con organ.
Okay. Did you have any siblings growing up?
I have two sisters. I have an older sister. Her name is Chris. She lives in California. I have a younger sister named Debbie, who lives in Lexington, Indiana.
Okay. And how would you describe your childhood?
Had a good childhood. Both parents were hard workers and taught us good morals. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom, which was typical back then, but she just took really good care of us and did a lot of things with us and just had a really good upbringing.
And were your parents the most influential people you would say then in your childhood?
They were, most definitely. I had a grandmother my grandmother Cheatham, who was very influential too. She kind of got me interested in reading the Bible and to learn about Jesus, and I was really thankful later on that she took the time to do that.
Yeah, okay, cool. And what were your family's political views growing up?
Well, they weren't really very strongly political. My mom and dad weren't. I had an uncle that lived in Madison that was elected as county clerk back in the 1960s.
Oh, okay.
So while he was in that office, he stored the voting machines for the county in my grandmother's garage, so he had to keep them someplace, so that's where they stored them.
Yeah. So did you ever, have conversations with your uncle about politics and stuff? Or?
I did. In fact, when I first ran in 1984, he was my campaign manager.
Oh, wow, okay. So did he then kind of groom you then as a political figure? Did he kind of mentor you and help you develop?
I didn't know much about politics, and I was pretty naive and still am about a lot of things, but he had a lot of connections and knew a lot of people in Madison, and he was able to be very helpful. One of his really good friends was a guy named Spence Snyder, who was a former state representative.
Yeah, okay.
And, he was also involved in my campaign and gave me a lot of good advice, and I appreciate both of them.
Cool, okay. What schools did you attend growing up?
I attended Madison schools, went to E.O. Muncie Grade School, Madison Junior High, and Madison High School.
And how would you describe your educational experiences there?
I had a really good education, top-notch teachers, very well educated themselves, and very good teachers, and just really an enjoyable experience being a child growing up in Madison, and the system there was just a really good time.
Did you have any favorite subjects?
Well, I did like social studies quite a bit. I ended up teaching social studies when I got out of college.
Oh, wow, okay. Really liked it.
That was my favorite subject,
yeah.
honestly.
Yeah, I guess. Were you involved in any clubs or sports teams in school?
Yes, I was in High Y, was a Christian group in school. I was in the Letterman's Club. I played sports in Madison and had several letters, and so I was in that organization. And they actually had a ping pong club. I was in the ping pong club, and
wow.
I like playing ping pong.
That's cool. All right. And so how did you view the state of Indiana growing up?
Well, I enjoy being in the Midwest. It's more rural small town area, and I enjoyed that. Still like living in a rural small town area. My first adventure at the State House was when I was in high school. I was in my government class, and the teacher brought us to the State House to sit in the gallery and watch the proceedings. And I still have a picture of that. And my teacher wrote a comment later on when I sent her a thank you note. She said, "Well, I'm glad you were able to sit there and watch what was going on and not fall asleep like you do in class." And she was just kidding, of course.
Yeah. So when you were there, did you ever imagine yourself like going to the State House as a legislator one day?
No, I didn't. I didn't have any idea that I'd ever do something like that.
Yeah. So what did you do after high school then?
Well, after high school, I went to college, and I went to Indiana State. I got a degree in social studies, and I went to Purdue after that and got a master's degree in political science.
Okay.
And after that, I got my first job teaching high school here in Jennings County.
Interesting. All right. And were you involved in any clubs in college, or?
Not really. I just more or less focused on the academic part of it, and didn't really get involved in anything besides that.
Was it a good experience for you in college?
Well, it was in certain ways. I did transfer from my first start. I actually went to IU my first year, and it was just IU was such a big school. I wasn't used to that being from a small town, so I transferred to Indiana State the next 3 years, and so it's a bit better situated for me.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. And how did your awareness of politics change when you were in college?
Well, it was interesting. When I was in college, I think it was the first time that the constitutional amendment that lowered the voting age to 18. So I remember voting the first time around that time. It was an interesting experience to be able to vote for the first time. I was interested in just being able to do that to see what the process was like.
Yeah, sure. So let's see. Think about your family life. When, if at all, did you get married?
I got married in 1973 to a girl that lived in Madison also, and we've been happily married ever since. We have we have 2 children. We have 7 grandchildren.
Oh wow!
So we have a nice family, and we really enjoy being around family.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And did your family have much influence in like your decision to run for the General Assembly?
Well, they did. As I mentioned earlier, my uncle was very influential and encouraged me to do that. And my wife was very helpful, very supportive. She worked hard to help me campaign and just taking care of the kids. And when you're in the General Assembly, you actually moved to Indianapolis and stay there during the week. And so she had a lot of responsibility taking care of the kids while I was gone.
Yeah. Yeah. How'd you guys manage that sort of family and work balance then going back and forth?
Well, we were a lot younger then, so we were able to handle things a lot better than what we do when we get older. But that's typical for everyone. But she was very hard worker, and we have other family close by. My parents and her parents live close by. They helped us out a lot too.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's helpful. So what shaped your political outlook then when you first got involved in politics, and you decide, okay, I'm gonna run for the General Assembly? Were there any like particular political topics that you're most interested in?
Yeah, being a public school teacher, I was very interested in education, and education is one of the biggest items that the General Assembly deals with, one of the biggest items in their budget, of course. So as a public school teacher, I was very interested in educational funding and educational laws, and that was really one of the main reasons that inspired me to try to run.
Did you have a campaign strategy?
Well, first time I ran, I really didn't have a developed strategy. I just listened to other people that gave me some advice that had run before.
Oh, okay.
And I kind of patterned myself. Our congressman at that time was Lee Hamilton, who had been a well-known congressman and just very, very popular. And so I got to know him and tried to look at some of the things he did and how he approached the job, and kind of used him as an example of what I wanted to do in my campaign as well.
Sure. Did you do any of like the door-to-door campaigning, or was it mostly like just reaching out to people in other ways? Or
well, we did the first time. I actually ran 2 different times. I ran in 1984 the first time, and then I left office in 1992, and I came back in 2006 and ran again and stayed for 6 years. So
yeah,
the first campaign in both of those periods, I did a lot of door-to-door. And in 2006, we went to like 6,000 houses in just one summer of campaigning.
Wow. Jeez. Okay. And how was that experience for you? Did you meet interesting people that way, or?
I did. There's a lot of interesting people when you go to their houses, you know. And
yeah.
A lot of people I knew. I grew up in Madison, and of course
Okay.
I taught school here in North Furnace, so I knew a lot of people
Yeah.
just that way. We did a lot of it in the summertime, and my wife was with me, and a couple of days it was pretty hot, and a lot of people had sympathy on us. We'd be kind of sweating as we walked door to door, and it's kind of hot, and they say, "Oh, come in, get a drink of water." You know, okay, we will. You know, so it was an interesting time.
Did you ever have any, like, because I imagine, you know, whenever someone's campaigning, you're going to someone's house, especially if it's someone you don't know, you kind of don't exactly you don't really know what you're, I guess, going to be walking into. Did you ever have any kind of weird situations or awkward ones talking to someone
Well, I had 2 different occasions where I was bitten by a dog. So I guess that would be very awkward. The first one was a little dog, and it bit me on my ankle.
Oh my gosh.
And the second time is a big dog, and I won't tell you where it bit me.
Okay. Not good, yeah. Wow, yeah. That makes it a little weird. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, you know, and I like dogs, but I guess, you know, some dogs are very protective when you go to the house and there's no one there. They become very defensive and very aggressive, and
Yeah.
I found that out. So I was always careful after that about dogs.
Fair enough. Do you remember who your main opponent was the first time you ran for office?
Yes, the first time I ran, it was another teacher at the high school where I taught.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Wow.
Yeah, it was you know, it was a little bit tense. I mean, we're still good friends, and we were good friends back then, but things that other people that were campaigning kind of did things that made it a little bit tense, which, you know, can get that way sometimes in campaign. But
Yeah.
I never wanted to be anyone to attack the other person running against. I just want to talk about myself and hope people will you know, consider that when they vote. And she was about the same way. I mean, she didn't really have an aggressive campaign, but other people that were involved in both sides kind of got aggressive, and that happens sometimes.
Yeah, okay, I guess, yeah, it's goes with the territory to a certain extent, I suppose. So what did you think of the election process as a whole?
Well, it's interesting with the legislature. You have more than one county, so I had 3 different counties, and just, you know, it's more of a regional type of campaign. And I was fortunate enough to have people in other counties that were very helpful and showing me around and getting to meet people. So that was the difference between running for, you know, state legislature than just a local office.
Yeah, okay. And what was your reaction when you found out that you won the election?
Well, we were pretty happy. We celebrated, and especially the very first time, we didn't know what we were getting into, but it turned out okay. Everything was well. But we had worked hard, and it was something that we prayed about a lot. We figured that God had led us to do that, and we were willing to go ahead and see what kind of adventures we were going to have.
Right, okay. And did you change campaign strategies for future elections, or you just kind of go with the same type of strategy, or?
Well, I'd say more like we refined the things we were doing.
Yeah.
You know, to kind of look back at some of the different campaign ads we had and the yard signs and things. We kind of developed a strategy of having like a similar orientation for signs. We have bumper stickers and signs that have the same design. So it's like almost like having your own trademark. So when people see the sign, they recognize it just simply by the way it's designed and everything.
Yeah, sure.
And my wife is really good at writing campaign ads. She's very good at using language, and she's very much in tune with what people think. And so she was very good, very helpful in writing campaign ads.
Oh, okay. So what were you thinking the first day you walked into the State House as an elected official?
I was in awe. It was just an awesome scene, and it's like I looked at myself, I thought, how did I get here?
Yeah.
I didn't really think I deserved to be there. It's just, I guess, the setting was, pretty overwhelming, and just have all the other people there, and just seeing all the things going on. I felt really blessed to be there. I mean, I was thankful that I could do that. It was such a great opportunity in my life to be able to serve.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot of things about laws, about different things in politics, and I learned a lot about human nature.
Sure. Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I guess you kind of have to become almost an expert on analyzing people when you're in that position.
Yeah, it's a lot of personal relationships, and you hope when you talk with people that when you give your word or you say you're going to do something or not do something that you keep your word. Mm-hmm. And in politics, that's not always easy to find.
Okay, yeah.
Unfortunately. But, I always tried to keep my word. I was very careful not to say I would do something or not do something unless I was absolutely sure I could do it.
So what would be, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a couple times where I had given my word to do something that was a very, very interesting situation. A couple of bills that came up back in the 1980s. The governor at the time, Bob Orr, had a program called Build Indiana, where they wanted to increase gasoline taxes to be able to have more funds to build more roads and more upkeep on the roads. And it was a partisan issue in a way because an election was coming up. It was the first time that Evan Bayh was running for governor. And at the time, I was a Democrat. So the numbers in the House were 52 Republicans and 48 Democrats. And to pass the bill, of course, you have to have 51. Well, there were two Republican representatives who had never voted for a tax increase, and they had publicly stated that they weren't going to vote for this bill because they would not vote for a tax increase. So to pass the bill, there had to be at least one Democrat voter representative to vote for the bill. And as it was, Governor Orr actually called me at home, and he told me that there were two projects in my district that were on the list if this bill passed, that they would spend several $1 million updating State Highway 7 and State Highway 62 in Madison and in North Vernon. And he assured me that if this bill passed, that those projects would be done. And, right. I was in a party, but I also represented an area, so I said, well, I'll do that. I'll vote for the bill. And so that would have been the 51st vote. Well, the day the bill came up, we had a caucus. Both parties had a caucus, and the leader of the Democratic caucus said, now, if all 48 of us stick together, this bill won't pass because we know for sure there are two Republicans that won't vote for it. So is everyone going to vote no? And I raised my hand, and I said, I'm going to vote yes. And so 47 people that were there started trying to convince me to not vote for the bill. And number one, I'd already given my word, and I thought I need to keep my word. Number two, I was more concerned about the people I represented in my district than about what happened with the political party.
Yeah.
So after 2.5 hours of being in the room with everyone doing everything they could, from yelling and screaming to threatening to just everything you can imagine, trying to convince me to change my mind, they finally left the room and we went out to vote. And the machine was open for like 15 minutes. Everyone had voted except for 3 or 4 people, and I was one of the ones that hadn't voted. And after that time, I finally went ahead and voted yes. And as soon as I voted yes, I was the 51st vote, and the machine locked up the vote, and it passed. So all 47 of the other people in the caucus turned around and looked at me, and they all shook their finger at me and said, well, this will be the last major vote you'll ever have because we'll get someone to run against you in the primary and you won't be here anymore. I said, well, at least I did something to help the area I live in.
Right.
So after the session was over and got back in the primary, they tried to recruit a lot of different people in different areas of the district to run against me, and no one would run against me. They said, people said, well, after he got this bill passed to get this highway project done, I mean, who would want to run against someone like that? He did something that's really good for the district.
Yeah.
So I didn't get an opponent, and I got reelected very easily, and so I learned a lesson that it's good to keep your word.
Wow, yeah. So, I mean, did party leadership try to punish you at all by like trying to take away your committee assignments or something like that, or?
Yes, they did.
Okay, and did they?
Eventually, the next election, we got the majority by one vote or one or two votes, and all of a sudden, those one or two people became more valuable. So I was restored to full equality on things.
Wow. Yeah, so I mean, I guess that's kind of the dilemma, especially with people that are in districts that don't necessarily reflect one political party all the time, where you're kind of put in the position that you may have to go against your party and deal with the consequences of that if you're going to follow what your constituents want. That's got to be a tough situation to be in.
Yeah, it's a tough decision. I knew I was doing what was right because I thought, even if doing this, the party was able to have somebody beat me in the next election, I could leave office feeling I'd done something good for the people that had elected me in the first place.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Wow. And going into the General Assembly, did you kind of have that understanding or expectation about the complexities of the General Assembly and the dynamics working with, party leadership or working across the aisle?
Yeah, that was something that I probably did a lot more than most people in the General Assembly. I had two different time frames really to look at. I had the 1980s, early 90s, and then 2006 to 2012. And in the earliest time frame, there was a lot more collegiality between the two parties. I mean, we go out and have dinner with each other and have a lot more social interaction. It got a lot more political in the second time around. It was a lot more political and things that were not even associating with each other socially.
Wow.
So, but you have to make friends. You have to go to events to be able to get to know people. I mean, it's all personal relationships. And not just with each other, it's also personal relationships with a lot of the lobbyists that are there to represent certain interests, because these people have, some people that they represent, so to speak, that have certain needs, and you have to try to evaluate those needs. And a lot of times you'll find, there's opposing lobbyists. Like traditionally, there's the trial lawyers lobbyist, excuse me, that, they represent people that will sue for damages, and then the insurance companies are the ones getting sued, so they don't want to have it make it easy for things to be sued on issues. So
right.
Those two groups tend to be opposed to each other a lot of times on different issues, on different bills that are in those areas. So you find out, well, why does the one want this certain way and why does the other one want this certain way, and you try and have to balance those ideas out.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess, dealing with lobbyists has got to be a complex thing, because how do you know if a lobbyist is telling you, like, accurate information, or if they're just, just trying to push their agenda?
Yeah, and that's the thing too about keeping your word, because there is mostly honor among the lobbyists when they say, well, we're going to support this, or we want, we will, if you will do this to the bill you have and this change, well, then we'll support it and try to get other people to vote for it. So there's honor like that too.
Yeah.
And for the most part, most people there were very honest about what they say. And I'd like people to come out and tell me exactly what they, if they don't like it, tell me why.
Mm-hmm.
And I operate better that way than somebody, that tells you something and does something else.
Yeah.
I had one example when I was there in the 80s. I had a bill that I introduced about student working hours. And actually teaching school, I had a student that came in one morning and just really sleepy, and we had a test that day. I said, why are you so sleepy? She said, well, I had to stay up late last night. I work at a local food store, a fast food place, and they they had me closed. I didn't get down until like midnight, and come I got home and studied, I just really sleepy.
Wow.
And I said, well, they could keep you out that late. She said, well, they told me if I didn't do that, they would fire me. I would lose my job. So I wrote a bill that said that, that when you're in high school and you're a certain age, there are certain hours that employers can't have you work past on a school night.
Yeah.
So that a student would be forced in that situation. So I got the bill introduced. I got it passed the committee in the House, and it passed the House. As it went to the Senate, the lobbyists for the fast food industry kept working with me to try to make changes to it. And I made a few little changes, but basically want to keep the same idea. And so it passed the Senate in a different form. It was amended a little bit and went to conference committee. And so I talked with this lobbyist. I said, are you supportive of the way we compromised? Are you supportive? He said, oh, yeah. He said, I'll help you get it past the conference committee, and we'll make sure it gets passed. And he said that in the hallway in front of a bunch of other people, a bunch of other lobbyists were there. So, a lot of people heard him say that.
Yeah.
So the next day, he went to the conference committee, and before the conference committee met, he had met with the people on the conference committee and convinced them to vote against the bill. And they did, and they killed it.
Wow.
And when I got there, I was shocked to see that. He didn't say anything to me. He just turned around and walked out. And one of the guys on the committee that voted against it said, well, such and such, they mentioned his name. He said, well, he said that you didn't want this bill to pass after all, that there was some things wrong with it. He convinced us to vote against it. I said, he did. So I followed him out in the hallway, and he was out there among a lot of the other people that heard me the other day when he said he was supported. And I asked him if he did that, and he kind of put his face down and said, yeah, I did that. He said, I had to work for my organization. I said, I understand that, but you lied to me. And he didn't say anything. He just put his head down.
Wow.
I said, I could handle it. You told me that you were against it, and you'd still be working against it, but I just don't like people that lie to me, because you wouldn't want me to lie to you, and you'd lie to me, and I think that's the right thing to do. And I just, I was a little bit upset. I didn't shout, but I had a strong voice when I was talking to him.
Yeah.
And he just put his head down and didn't say anything. And when I turned around to walk away, the other people in the hallway applauded. They actually clapped their hands like they had known this guy. I guess that he'd done it to them before too.
Yikes. Jeez.
So interesting turnabout. The next year, I reintroduced the bill again, and this time, not only did the same guy that stopped it last time did he help, he also convinced the Fast Food Association to have a scholarship. They established a scholarship to give to students that worked in the fast food industry, and it passed, and they had this scholarship to help these students. So that it turned out really good in the end.
Okay, I guess he kind of just felt bad about it, I guess, and tried to help out the next time. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty. That's a pretty wild situation. So it sounds like lobbyists then have a fair amount of influence on helping craft people's views then about legislation. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes, I think that's definitely accurate. There's certain groups that tend to line up with certain parties, and there's different people in the legislature that have more power. If they're a committee chairman, if they're one of the leaders, and they tend to make alliances with different lobbying groups, not only for the issues, but also there's campaign support. A lot of make donations during the campaigns.
Right. Yeah, so I mean that's another interesting aspect then to look at. Like, how influential would you say campaign donations or gifts from lobbyists? How influential is that to a politician's views when it comes to legislation?
Well, I think it's very influential. Sadly, in my view, it's more influential than just the common everyday voter.
Yeah.
They're organized, and they have numbers, and they have money.
Yeah.
And there's no saying in politics that money is the lifeblood of politics. Well, that's true on a lot of levels, and especially the higher up you go. And it's probably more of an issue with leadership, because leadership has such an inordinate amount of influence on what happens with legislation and just shaping policy in general. That it's probably more common to see that kind of influence at the level of the committee chairman or the speaker or the majority leader or somebody like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So party leadership then also plays a huge role. And I guess party leadership, doesn't necessarily have to hear legislation in a committee then, and they can just, describe the I guess, how influential party leadership is in terms of just getting a bill heard or in the first place.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned on the other example I gave you about the caucus, both parties caucus.
Yeah.
And the leadership will come out in the caucus and say, well, here's certain bills we want to have passed. Here's certain bills we don't want to have passed. And then there's other bills that you just vote the way you think you should vote on yourself. So they got to go through an agenda like that. And the leadership, picks the things that they think, and they give reasons for it. There's always reasons for it. But, you still have some discretion yourself, but most of the time, most people will follow those directions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So, going through then that process as a legislator, are there things that you would, like if you could, are there things that you would change about the legislative process based on your experiences?
Well, I don't know. I guess part of it would be with Indiana. It's a part-time legislature. We still call it citizen legislature. You meet for different terms, like in the long years up till April 30th, and the short years like March 15th.
Right.
And especially the short session. There's hundreds of bills you go through, and you should at least read a summary of each thing and try to read the actual bill itself if you can. But toward the end of the session, it gets almost impossible to do. So it's like you're voting on things that you don't know exactly all the details to, which...
Yeah.
And, I know if you had full-time legislature, then it would make it difficult because then people would have to have that job as a full-time job.
Right.
Like Congress, and that's not good either because I was a teacher, and I went up to the legislature when it was in session, and when it was over, I came back to my teaching job. So I still had a job if I lost the election or didn't come out okay.
Yeah.
So there's good and bad to change it to make it full-time. But, maybe just make it a little bit longer than what it is so you have more time to actually read bills and see what's in them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Now, how influential would you say things like gerrymandering were when you served?
Yeah, gerrymandering is pretty influential. The last time I ran, in office was 2010, and that election, the majority changed from being Democrat to Republican in the House, and the Senate was still Republican. And so the district I had was basically the same district that I, started out in 1984. And the main area was Jennings in Jefferson County, which I had, a lot of students in school. I had family in Jefferson County, so I was so-called well-situated as far as knowing people in the area. In 2010, gerrymandering changed the district I was in to just have a very small part of Jennings County, having most all of Jackson County, which is Seymour, and very little. So probably the district that I started out in, probably only about 25 to 30% of it was left after the gerrymandering.
Wow. Okay.
And there was a gentleman who is currently the legislator for this district that lived in Seymour, and I knew that with that gerrymandering that it was going to be a really difficult campaign. And in fact, at that time, I'd been in office so long, I was ready to retire anyway. I'm thinking I just probably go ahead and retire from office, and I'd served 14 years, and it was getting very contentious in the legislature anyway. It was the year before that was the walkout, when the Democrat Party walked out, and
right.
all that was going on. And I just don't have that kind of personality to be in a contentious situation like that. So
yeah,
it had a lot to do with my decision not to run again in 2012.
Yeah, so I guess it just kind of got too toxic almost then to be there.
Yeah, it was a more toxic atmosphere, and the fact that the district itself has changed so substantially is almost like having to start completely all over again.
Oh wow, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Now Now, you mentioned the legislative walkout. Can you describe exactly what was going on in that situation?
Yeah, it was a very unpleasant situation. The numbers had changed in the election of 2010. The Democrats had like 51 to 49, and after the election, it was like something like 61 to 39 Republican.
Yeah.
And the Republican Party drafted legislation that was not just a matter of changing some small things, but basically wanted to take away a lot of the legislation that affected labor unions and teachers and public education. They wanted to have the budget reduced for public schools, and that money that was going to public schools be given to private schools. And I didn't have a problem with giving money to private schools. I had a problem with taking away from public schools.
Right.
That did most of the people in the Democrat Party. So at that time, with the numbers, the only way to stop that kind of legislation, or at least have some leverage to try and negotiate a different set of circumstances, would be to walk out and not have a quorum. So that's what the Democrat Party did. I, being a public school teacher, thought it was the right thing to do, and I did. And I guess I was disappointed in a couple ways. One was that I thought a lot of the parents and a lot of the people in the school would support what I did, and they didn't. They were just apathetic. There's really no offer to help or support, and I was really surprised and disappointed about that. And the second thing was, after doing the walkout for such a long time and trying to get some leverage, so the leadership came back in and really didn't gain any advantage from doing all that, and all the legislation passed anyway.
Wow.
So it's like it was a very stressful time. The Republican Party, and I still am really doubtful about the legality of it, but no one really challenged it, but they imposed fines on us without even having the authority to do so, because they couldn't pass a law since they weren't in session, since there was no quorum.
Okay.
But they just on their own imposed fines on all the people that walked out. And at that time, I was fined around $7,000 for the walkout, which was very difficult for our family to have to pay that.
Yeah.
And we couldn't use campaign funds. They passed it in such a way we couldn't use campaign funds.
Wow.
So it had to come out of our own pocket.
Okay. Geez. Yeah.
And so that was, it was questionable legality-wise. I don't know. Constitution says you can't have lose life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Well, I lost property without due process of law. There was no law that said that. It was just simply a party dictum.
Yeah.
That said they were going to do that. So that was a difficult part of it, but just the whole nature of the whole thing. There was so much. The hallways were filled with people all the time. They were yelling and screaming at each other, and it's just like God was telling me, well, your time to be there is now done. You need to go on and do something different.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like it got pretty frustrating.
Yeah, it was. It was very frustrating.
Well, think about your legislation that was going on when you served, the legislation you worked on. Do you remember by any chance the first bill that you sponsored?
I do. I remember that very well. When I first got elected in Jefferson County, where Madison is,
yeah,
they were building a nuclear power plant. It was called Marble Hill.
Okay.
And it was Public Service Indiana and Northern Indiana Public Service had gone together, and they were building this nuclear power plant. Well, it was very controversial because it's on the Ohio River.
Yeah.
And nuclear power contracts were very new at that time, and construction was very new. It wasn't really refined like it is now. And so they started the project. They went along so far, and they invested over $1 billion in the building. And as they got to the point where they were doing checking on some of the structures, the x-rayed some of the concrete pours, and they found there were honeycombs. There were pockets inside that were not concrete. There was defective construction, and so they shut the whole project down.
Okay.
Okay, what happened locally with the local tax rate in Jefferson County? Well, this facility was being taxed, and it's over $1 billion facility, so they were paying like 3/4 to 7/8 of all the property tax for the area because they were such a big property.
Wow.
And when they shut down, they went off the property tax roll because they were no longer they were bankrupt. They had declared bankruptcy.
Jeez,
so the
okay.
local school system in Hanover, Southwestern School System, because of Marble Hill shutdown, was going to have to increase the property tax in that small part of the county. It was a small town, Hanover, 5,000 people. They're going to have to increase the property tax 1,800%.
Oh my gosh.
So it would just, there's a lot of farmers and they had a lot of land. It was just going to really be devastating for the area.
Yeah.
So I get elected the year this happens, and I come in and people are trying to figure out what to do. They don't know how to handle this. They know that we have to do something. So I had a bill written by a guy named Greg Landwehr, who was the fiscal legislative assistant or legislative services person, and I had him write the bill to do this, to take the school formula and simply create a scenario as if Marble Hill had never existed. If Marble Hill had never existed, how would the formula then react with the local school system? And that's what we would pick up on. We passed a bill to just kind of put it in that situation so it would go on as if it had been normal.
Okay.
And so that's what we did. And being in the minority party at that time, I was very pleased. Pat Kiley, who was the Republican chairman of Ways and Means Committee, was very gracious and very helpful. He liked the idea. So I wrote the bill as the original author, but he came on and we switched the authorship where he became the original author, so he would have control of the bill. And I was the secondary author on the bill. So we were able to get it past the House, and we got the Senate. The Senate finance chairman wanted to have control of it, so he switched it over to Senate Bill 156. And we were the two House authors, and he took it over as a Senate bill, and it passed basically unchanged from where we started out. And the governor signed it, so it just saved a lot of headache and a lot of distress for the people in that school district. And in the county, Jefferson County, it was affecting their tax rate a lot too, but it all evened it out, and there was no damage, and people went back to normal. So as a freshman, to have a piece of legislation passed was unusual in the minority party, but to have something and that kind of an issue was even more unusual. So I was very thankful that I got some help and kindness especially from Pat Kiley, who was also a former legislator, and he was really good to work with. And it wasn't a matter of who took credit for it; it was a matter of getting it done, and that was really something. So, like the local school superintendent, when I first got elected, he said, "Well, what we're going to do?" He said, "You haven't been there, you don't know what you're going to do." And he said, "I'm just really worried." I said, "Well, I'll do the best I can, And after it all came out and turned out good, he came back to me and he said, "I'm sorry, I underestimated what you could do." He said, "You did a pretty good job after all." so we became close friends after that. I said, "Well, if there's any other things in school," he said, I'll give you a call. I said, "Okay, well, thanks."
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, sounds like a pretty big challenge to walk into for your first session.
Yeah, it was. It was, and at first I had to do a lot of work and a lot of study just to get what all was involved, how this bankruptcy affected, what the local property tax rate was, and, all the different information like that. And it was a lot of work, but it came out pretty good.
Yeah, okay. What would you say were the most controversial legislative issues when you served?
Well, I'd say that I've always been pretty conservative, and even as a Democrat. Mm-hmm. And I've always been in favor of right to life.
Okay.
And there's been a lot of different bills that have gone through the time I was in the legislature to restrict the availability for abortion, or in some cases even try to eliminate abortion in Indiana.
Right.
Back in, I think it was 1988, we had, when the election was held, there was a tie. There was 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans. So that's only the first time in Indiana. It's happened twice in Indiana, but it's only the first time it happened. I was there. And it only happened 3 times in United States history as far as having a tied legislature like that.
Yeah, okay.
So at that time, the solution to having 50-50 was we had 2 speakers and 2 chairmen of each committee.
Yep.
That year, I introduced a bill on viability for abortion. If a fetus can live a certain age outside the mother, then there shouldn't be allowed to be an abortion because the person could be living on their own. They shouldn't be aborted.
Mm-hmm.
So I introduced this bill, and there's like I say, there's 2 chairmen. So it went to the Public Service Committee, and since it was a controversial abortion bill, they knew they were going to have a big crowd of people to come testify or at least watch what was going on. So instead of having it at the State House, they actually went to IU campus in Indianapolis and rented an auditorium that held 5,000 people. So we had the hearing at the bill at this auditorium, and it was packed.
Yeah.
And it was almost like you could see on the left side from the stage, you could tell people when I was getting ready to make my presentation, they were smiling at me. And about the other, on the right side, people were there with their arms crossed and scowling at me.
Yeah.
So it's like almost an evenly divided audience. I could just kind of tell by looking at the facial expressions of people in the audience.
Wow.
And so I had to give up and present this bill that's controversial in front of 5,000 people.
Yeah.
And, the chairman was good about keeping order. He told people that they couldn't speak out or say anything, and people cooperated for the most part. But I could tell that when it was over, there's a lot of people that just, when I finished, they just got up, and about half the people got up and walked out, and the other half that kind of stayed there and were smiling. So I thought, well, I can kind of see who supports it and who doesn't.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
So it was pretty controversial, and I had another time. The last couple of years I was in session in the 2010 session where I had another bill that passed the Senate that was about abortion services. If a doctor gave a woman an abortion, this bill required that the doctor provide health care for her after the abortion, which seemed like a very reasonable thing to do. If you're going to give a lady an abortion, you should be able to go back to the doctor, have a checkup later on, and make sure that everything was fine health-wise. Yeah. That became a very controversial bill also. When I was the House sponsor of the Senate bill, I was the House sponsor, and when I made the presentation, my own party attacked me on the floor. They said things about me and kind of said how wrong I was and how this is a terrible thing. And so that was different, too, to be attacked. I mean, it was very widespread. And I had people before the hearing even from my own party saying they begged me and not to have the bill, not to let it go up. And, it was really a very tense situation that way, too.
Right.
And I remember as I presented the bill on the floor, at that point in time, I've been there for a long time. I didn't really get nervous that often, but I was pretty nervous about this because of all the tension going on. And I remember I looked up to the gallery as I was making my presentation, and there was a lady up there that I could see was praying for me.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, I just had this feeling of calmness come over me, and I was able to go ahead and make the presentation, and all this weight was just taken off my shoulders instantly. And it's just really an amazing thing.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of sounds like, because it sounds like you had several kind of brush-ups with your own party. It almost sounds like you must have kind of felt like you're almost an independent, member of the General Assembly at some points in your career, because you had really, you either get criticized by one party for by the Republican Party because you're usually working on Democrat legislation, or you get criticized by the Democratic Party for crossing over on the other side for legislation that you identify with more. That must have been a kind of a challenge then to be in that position.
It was, and it was more of a challenge the second time I was in office than the first. I've always been conservative. Mm-hmm. I was in the Democrat Party because of being a public school teacher.
Yeah.
But I think there were less conservative people in the Democrat Party as time goes on, even more so today than what there has been in the past.
Okay. So do you think then that the parties in Indiana, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, have they become further away that are like more to the extremes than before in terms of being conservative or liberal?
I think they have, yes. I think there's more extremes now because the Republican Party has more of a base, and really they have super majorities in both houses now in Indiana.
Yeah.
And I think that there are a lot of Democrats that realized that it would be more difficult to get elected in Indiana as a Democrat. So the moderate Democrats have switched over to the Republican Party, and so it's made the Republican Party less conservative than what it had been.
Interesting.
I think that's what happened right now, and I think this past session, if you can see that with some of the legislation came out on some of the school social issues like critical race theory and gender sports and things like this, that, the General Assembly only really passed one bill that dealt with all these issues on this current session, and the governor vetoed that.
Yeah.
So, that was a conservative bill, and, I don't think the governor is very conservative. I mean, I don't have anything against him, but I just, it's an observation of what he did with this bill that I think this made the whole state a little bit more liberal and less conservative than what it had been.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that is an interesting concept I've kind of always wondered about because, you see the supermajorities, and obviously if you're interested in running to be a member of the General Assembly and you see that, the proportion of Republicans versus Democrats, if you were somewhat moderate, you would think that, maybe running as Republicans, like your only shot of getting elected unless you're in a really safe Democratic district.
Right.
And almost you wonder then if that supermajority were to increase over time, if you're almost going to get the Republican Party split almost at some point because it's...
Yeah, that's what's close to happening right now. There's a conservative wing and a more liberal wing of the Republican Party.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. What would you say was the most complex piece of legislation that you ever worked on?
Well, I worked on a piece of legislation that had to do with missing persons.
Okay.
There was a girl that lived in Madison who was in college, and she was out running, and she disappeared, and didn't return to the dorm, and was gone and was missing, and she was never found. It's been 20 years ago when this happened, maybe, but and there were people that were with her that were roommate, other people. They called the police and reported her missing, but the police didn't start the investigation until like 3 or 4 days later. And at that point in time, it was just like the trail was so cold, they just didn't have any chance to really find out what happened.
Yikes.
So I introduced some legislation that had to do with missing persons, and it required local police authorities to, if there's a call about a missing person, that they need to go ahead and begin the investigation immediately. Because there was a lot of statistics all the way from the FBI on down to the state police of cases where if the investigation started immediately, there was a much, much higher success rate of recovering that person or finding that person than if it went for a day or two.
Yeah.
So it was complicated. The state police opposed it because they didn't want to have that imposed on them by the legislature. It wasn't that they didn't want to have people investigated, but they didn't want to have that forced on them. But they don't tend to do that. They have other things. They have their own preferences, and the statistics were just overwhelming, showing how much more you could save a person's life if you were to start an investigation immediately.
Yeah.
So it was a very complicated bill. I had to try to compromise with the state police. They were very good to work with. They had their own procedures and things they wanted to do, but we finally were able to get it passed. And there's some cases that happened after that people were actually probably saved. They probably saved their life because they did start the investigation a lot sooner. And the whole thing that probably stuck out the most in my mind as we went through this bill, when it was in the Senate committee, it passed the House and went to the Senate committee. And Senator Young was the Senate sponsor. He had someone in his district that had been kidnapped and found murdered, and he was very interested from a personal standpoint.
Yeah.
So as we had the committee meeting, there was a lady that came in, and I don't remember her name, but her testimony still sticks in my mind. She came in and she testified that a couple of years ago, her sister was abducted from a house trailer. And when she reported to the police, she called when she found out, it was like within an hour or so when she was abducted. She called the police, and from the neighborhood she lived in, it was a poor neighborhood, and the police wouldn't even talk to her. They said, well, we get all these calls all the time. We don't have time to check on these things.
Wow.
And so she was so disheartened by the fact that the police wouldn't even listen to her. And it says like, well, you're just in this bad neighborhood. We don't really listen to calls in this neighborhood, and we can't help you out. So they told her they couldn't help her. Her sister turned up murdered, and she was just really bitter that the police didn't even try to help save her sister's life.
Yeah.
And so here she is testifying at this committee, and she said, I called the police to get help to save my sister's life. They wouldn't listen to me. She said, here I am now at the State House in Indianapolis, before the Senate committee in the state of Indiana with senators and representatives of the state of Indiana. And I'm standing here and I'm telling my story, and you guys are listening to me. She said, this has restored my faith in government, because when I tried to do something to help my sister to save her life, no one listened. She said, now you're listening to what I have to say, and you're trying to do something to help save other people's lives in the future. She said, that's restored my faith in government. And that just stuck with me. It's just like, yeah, that's what government should be all about. I mean,
Sure.
It shouldn't be where you live or who you are. It should be there to help anyone that has a need.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Wow. Let's see, thinking about some of the specific legislation stuff that was going on when you served, I saw like the newspapers, there was debates going on around like gay marriage and stuff. What do you remember about those debates going on? And
yeah, the gay marriage, I was there at the time. In fact, I was the co-author of the marriage amendment in the House.
Okay.
And I remember there were a lot of people out in the hallway. There were people that just filled the hallways about it is a very controversial issue, and it was like I felt that sometimes some of the traditional things we do things it's based on what God said about marriage, and I had no problem with people making contracts about if you want to have a certain person inherit your money or have a certain person visit you at the hospital, you can sign a contract of some sort and do that. I had no problem with doing those kind of relationships, which is really what a lot of gay people were asking for. But to say it's a marriage, I just couldn't accept that. I just think that was wrong. And so I was the co-author in this marriage amendment, and it was interesting, the testimony, and we listened to what people had to say, and in a constitutional amendment, you had to pass it 2 different years to get it to be part of the Constitution and have it voted on by the people. Well, it passed the first year, and before the second year, it could be done in the second year. The Supreme Court of the United States actually made a decision that allowed gay marriage, so it kind of took away the illegal possibility of doing something like that. But during the whole time we were doing that, it was one of the things that stuck in my mind. There was a young lady that came in to testify to the committee, and she reported that she was gay, and she was here to testify. I thought, well, she's going to be against the bill, against the constitutional amendment because she's gay. She said, I was gay, and she said, I thought that's who I was, that I was a born-a-gay person. And she said, then I accepted Jesus as my Savior, and I realized that that's not who I am. That's just something I do. Okay. And she said, I realized that I don't have to do that. That doesn't define who I am. I'm a person who's a child of God, and I am not going to do that. And she said, I've given up being a homosexual. She said, I'm not doing that anymore. She said, I know it was just a behavior. It wasn't who I am or who I was. And she said, that just changed my whole outlook on the whole thing. She said, I think that's really the myth and the lie that people are believing. They think that they're born that way and they have to be that way, and you don't. She said, I'm living proof of that. I rejected that lifestyle. It's not who I am. To me, that really made a lot of sense, because it's like people were saying, well, it's like race. Well, if you're born a certain race, race. That's who you are. You can't change that. That's kind of the way that people were looking at homosexuality. But this girl who had been homosexual came in and said, that's not it. That's not true. And it really made me think about that whole issue in a different way.
So I guess you really got people from all sorts of different perspectives coming in that committee to sort of give their perspective on it. That's interesting. Sounds like a lot of different people.
Yes,
And so was that another piece of legislation then that kind of alienated you from your party then, or?
Yes, it did. Yeah, my party didn't want that to pass, and I don't understand that, but yeah, they didn't want me to be co-author, and I did anyway.
Yeah.
Because it's something I sincerely believed in.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Now, just moving towards some kind of big picture reflection questions. How would you summarize your time as a state legislator?
It was a very enjoyable time, mostly. I enjoyed being able to do that, to be able to serve. I felt it was a privilege. I necessarily didn't deserve, but I still looked at it as being a privilege to be able to have some of the opportunities that I had to do things and to be where I was, to see different people, and to get to know some people that went to the legislature. I've made some lifelong friends in the legislature, so overall it was a very rewarding experience. I'm thankful that I got to do that.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. Do you have like a favorite memory or a story from your time in the Indiana General Assembly?
Well, there are a lot of different stories. I guess one of my favorite ones was the second time I was in office, there's a place here in my district where there was a farm, and they had older horses that they would take and they would ship to Mexico to made into fertilizer or glue, something like that. But these poor horses were out in like this field of mud, and it was all dirty and everything. They weren't very well taken care of. And so I had several people in the district said, well, can you do something about this? And I thought, well, you really can't pass a law on how horses are treated unless they're just being really mistreated. Just standing out in the field of mud is not mistreatment. But I thought, well, I'll try to do something just to make a point that, to draw attention to this. Maybe the guy that owned the farm would try to make it better for the horses. So I introduced an amendment on a bill that had something to do with the same area, that anyone who had a farm, that they had to provide a dry place for animals to be able to be taken to so they wouldn't be out in the weather or out in muddy conditions or something like this.
Okay.
With no place else to go.
Interesting.
That's about the best I could think of,
Yeah.
And I knew it wasn't going to pass, but I thought, well, I at least have to try and get some attention to this one situation. Maybe the guy would change the situation. So I presented my amendment, and one of the legislators who is a farmer, when he's not in the legislature, got up to question me, and he started asking questions. Well, how are you going to, what kind of place you're going to have for the animal to be? I said, well, you could have a concrete slab, or you could have a dry area on a little hillside or grassy area or something like this, And, well, what if a farmer doesn't do this? What are you going to do? I said, well, I guess you could have a fine. Trying to answer all these questions.
Yeah.
And he said, the next question was, well, is this mainly for horses? And this just came into my mind, and I knew it wouldn't go past him. I said, well, Representative, and I said his name, I said, from all your questions, to me it sounds like on this particular amendment that you're going to vote nay. He didn't stop. And the whole area just broke into laughter. I mean, it kind of cut the edge a little bit because he was, really grilling me on things, but we just had a little humor on that.
Yeah.
It was meant to be funny.
Right.
And one of the guys in the front row almost fell out of his chair. He was laughing so hard because the guy that was asking the question, he just had this deer in headlight look on his face, like he didn't know how to respond. I was just joking, I was just joking about it. But I guess from your comments, you're going to vote nay.
Oh my gosh.
So that was a fun moment. And
yeah.
It was a good memory for me.
Sure. What lessons did you learn from your experiences?
I think probably the biggest lesson is I learned how to be a better judge of human nature.
Okay.
To be able to understand people better on what they're really saying, or what they really need, or what they really mean when they do something. And I had a lot of cases I can compare myself to when I first started out. How naive and green I was. And I learned a lot when I went through. I mean, I still don't know everything and never will, but
right.
I learned a lot about human nature. I had a guy in the opposite party who was a good friend of mine. He was also one we did a lot of bills together. And I had a bill on education about bargaining with school systems. And he went on as a co-author. And I said, now, I said his name. I said, your party's not going to want you to do this. I said, they're going to be told that you can't do this. You're going to have to get off. He said, no, I want to do this anyway. He said, you're a good friend. I want to be co-author with you. I said, no. I said, you're going to get some heat from your party. He said, I don't care. I can handle the heat. Okay, so I put his name on the bill. Well, a couple of days later, he comes back to me and said, I need to talk to you. I said, okay. He said, you were right. He said, I'm getting a lot of heat from my party, and they want me to take my name off the bill.
Okay.
I said, let's go ahead and take your name off the bill. He said, no. He said, I gave my word to you that I'd stay on the bill. And he said, I'm going to stay on. I said, no. I said, let's go ahead and take your name off the bill. I don't want you to get all this heat because the bill's probably not going to pass anyway. I said, to me, it's better to have a friend than to have a co-author on a bill. And I want to protect you as a friend, so I'm going to go ahead and take your name off. And that's just, that's what we need to do. So he thanked me for that. And we were friends already, but he became even a deeper friend because it's like I was looking out more for him than I was worried about the bill itself. And I learned that those are the important things, more than what you have as far as passing a bill or getting something done, is the kind of friendships and kind of relationships you have with other people.
Yeah, okay. Sure. Did you have any regrets as a legislator?
Yes, I have one regret. I should have done something differently on a particular bill that I was just kind of overwhelmed on. And I won't go into the details of it, but
okay.
I was lied to by my own party leadership. And instead of doing something about it, I kept thinking that they were going to come around and be honest about and do what they had promised they were going to do. And they never did, and it affected some things that it really made it difficult.
Okay.
And, looking back now, I wish I had been a bit stronger in standing up to the leadership on this one particular thing. But, again, you live and learn when you go through situations, and that's sometimes those things just happen like that.
Yeah, sure. What was your proudest moment?
Probably, I'd say to have the missing persons bill passed.
Yeah. Okay.
That was something that could save people's lives, and that was like a lot of. And I had some good help from a lot of people. I mean, the cousin of the missing girl was very, very helpful. She actually became my legislative assistant later on.
Oh, okay.
But it was
interesting.
just something that was, when you do something that would be good for people, especially if you could potentially save someone's life, that was a good moment.
Yeah, sure. What advice would you give to future legislators or even current legislators?
Keep your word. One. Number two, don't go into office and just try to get by and just kind of coast through, and don't. I mean, there can be controversial things that you want to avoid, but take a stand for what is right. Don't just go there and just say, well, there wasn't anything I could do about this. This is something that's bad is happening, but I just couldn't do anything about it. It's like sometimes you got to take a stand. Sometimes you got to put yourself out there, and like I did on that one bill that benefited my district as far as those construction projects. I knew it was going to be a difficult thing, but I had to do something to try to help my district, and it could have cost me the election.
Yeah.
It didn't, but it could have. And people get too concerned about getting reelected. I mean, they do everything for the most part to see how to make it easy and less controversial about getting reelected. But you shouldn't be looking for controversial things, but you shouldn't stay away from something controversial if it means doing the right thing.
Right.
And I see there's so many legislators now that just don't want to stand up and take on anything that's controversial because they don't want to jeopardize their chance of getting reelected. They're worried more about their job than they are what they're supposed to be there for in the first place.
Okay, yeah. So what would you say is the most important work of the Indiana General Assembly?
Well, I think the most important work probably is education. I mean, that's the biggest part of the budget. As a former teacher, I just really am disappointed in the way a lot of things are going. We spend way too much money and time on testing from the state.
Yeah.
I taught school, and I gave tests in my class on the subject I taught. And they were good indicators of how the students were doing because I taught the subject first, and then I tested them on it. With the state testing now, they don't give you what they're going to be putting on the test. So if you're teaching math, well, do you concentrate more in quadratic equations or in algebra, Well, one test they have from the state might have, 60% of the questions on one thing, and you might not be able to teach all that.
Mm-hmm.
So you only have a fair test if the material has been taught first and then tested on. And with the state testing, that doesn't happen. They just randomly pick different things to put on the test, and there's just so much different things they put on it. There's a lot of things they put on there that haven't even been taught to kids, and they're being tested on something they were never taught, and that's just simply not fair.
Yeah. Okay. What does the public not know about the Indiana General Assembly and how it operates?
Oh, they probably suspect it, but they don't know exactly how all these deals are made.
Yeah. Okay.
There's just a lot of deals go on. There's a lot of trading back and forth for this and that. And I don't think they realize how much money influences the legislature.
Sure.
Sometimes something passes because somebody gives a lot of money. And, it's legal because you make campaign contributions, but you go back and look at how much money is contributed by certain groups to certain people that concern certain issues, and you'll find there's a big tie there between those two kind of things. And people they know it, but they don't realize how deep it is, I think.
Right. Yeah. How has the state of Indiana changed over the course of your lifetime?
Well, I think the thing that's changed more than anything is technology. It just changed our whole life on everything. I mean, just think how quickly things have changed in the last few years. The internet and the iPhones and all the cell phones and just all the. When I was in office first time, when I sent out letters, I had a typing pool.
Yeah.
I would write out the letter by hand, and then the typist would type it and send it out.
Wow.
Second time I was in, I was speaking to a recorder, and the computer would print it out and have it mailed out. So it's like the whole typing pool was eliminated. Even toward the end of the time I was there, I mean, we still have. When I came back the second time in late 2006, we still had stacks of paper bills on the desk we could read.
Wow. Okay.
Right toward the end of it, we had laptop computers we had on our desk, and we didn't have all that paper. We just simply brought it up on screen and read it on screen. Saved tons of papers, made it a lot easier to get information. So the technology has really made a big difference on what's going on. And it's changed the whole state and the whole country, the whole world, really. But that's been the biggest change probably I've seen.
How have the people of Indiana changed?
I think the people of Indiana have, I think they've become more liberal.
Okay.
It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the values and I think it's more of a generational thing than anything. I think younger generation doesn't understand some things. I mean, I think a lot of younger people now think socialism is okay. Mm-hmm. And it's not. I mean, mm-hmm. I lived during the time of the old Soviet Union, and we were looking at nuclear war and Marxism and all that stuff. I mean, and all the death and destruction that the socialist system did to people in Europe and Russia. I mean, people didn't live through that. Younger people now didn't live through that. They don't understand how terrible it can be. I did. I lived through that. We had nuclear survival drills in school. We had to get under our desks and do that, because we were expecting nuclear war. I went through the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was in school. I thought the world was going to end. This is all the effects of socialism. And now people think, it's okay. Everybody gets everything free. It's like, no, that's not the way it works. But that's probably the biggest change, I think, is that the people generationally have been, I think, brainwashed into thinking that socialism is a good system. It's not.
Yeah, it does seem like there's big generation gaps. I guess a lot of based on also I guess the differences in experiences growing up, and that sort of historical memory doesn't necessarily carry on, I suppose, from generation to generation.
I taught history in school. I taught world history, and I understand that maybe better than some is that if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat the mistakes. But a lot of kids they don't look at that history. They just take the media's word for it now. That, this is a good thing. We can get all this free stuff. Everything's free,
right?
And nothing's free. It's not.
Let's see. What hasn't changed about the people of Indiana?
I think the people of Indiana still care for each other. I think they want to do what's right and want to do what's good for their kids and for, there's a basic belief in God. I think we're still very religious people. We still believe in each other and believe in helping each other. And, helping each other, you can see that a lot of times when something bad goes, a lot of people step up and help other people. And I don't think that's changed. I think there's still good human nature in people of Indiana.
Yeah, okay. Final question. What do you want the people of Indiana to know about their influence on the General Assembly?
They have more influence than they realize. I mean, I used to be, if something came up and I heard, 10 or 12 people would call me or contact me, I knew that was something important to look at. And, if you have 100 people call you, then you better be, paying attention. You better be looking at things and people don't realize that. I mean, one or two people calling doesn't make much difference, but if you have a group or a large number, legislators do listen to that because they are concerned about getting elected, and those are voters, and they need to listen. So I think that people need to understand that better, that they do have more control than they think as far as contacting legislators.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, is there anything that I did not ask about that you want to mention, or?
I think we've covered it real well. I hope I've provided some good information for you, too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it should be a good addition to the collection of interviews. So thank you again for taking part in doing this.
Sure, I enjoyed it and covered some of the old memories.
Yeah, that's right. Go down memory lane, and it's always interesting for sure. So, all right. Thanks again. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. Good talking to you.
Yes, you too. I'll be in touch.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.